you can be close to other people. So to me, having private offices is detrimental to the speed at which your company can develop new ideas. And when you're a startup, and especially when you're bootstrapped, you need to have those ideas very quickly. So get together in a space, whether that be Campfire, and that's great. That works for a long time. Eventually, you'll want a space of your own that you can meet in physically and not have to pay for coffee. That's great, right? But let it grow organically, right? We haven't fancied out this office. It's not because we don't have money. It's because we don't really need to. You don't need all these fancy things to make a good company. So you've got a company, you're doing your thing, and you have a product, right? Now, how are you going to decide how to build that product? Like, what is going to make that product awesome? So here's something that changed the way that I think about building products. You see, this thing here, which a lot of you probably own, when you go to the site, they don't talk about specs. They don't talk about, oh, how fast is the processor, or how much RAM does it have, because those things are irrelevant. What's relevant is the experience that you have using it. And so me, working on a technical product like Github, this strikes me as really valuable because you take something technical, you don't want to sell the technology, right? You don't want to sell the technology, you want to sell the experience. So GitHub isn't about using Git, it's about collaborating on software with your friends and your coworkers, right? Git is irrelevant. It's what you can do with it and the ease with which you can do those things that's important. Another thing you can do when you're self-funded is decide everything, okay? And this is extremely valuable because what is it that we all want? What is it that we're optimizing for? What do all of you in this room want to do in your futures? To me, it feels sometimes like we're always optimizing for money, right? Where are we going to get the biggest valuation? Where are we going to take angel, or are we going to take VC, right? It's always about the money. What's our exit going to be? Who's going to buy us? All of these things. But I think that's optimizing for the wrong variable. I think instead of focusing on money all the time, focusing on how much money can we put in the bank account and then spend even though we're not making any profit, why don't we optimize for what we really want, which is happiness? And how do you optimize for happiness? Well, first of all, you don't have anyone telling you what to do. All right? Control. Autonomy. This is how you get happiness. There's another really great book called Drive by Dan Pink. And you absolutely must read this book because it tells you what the people who are going to be working for you once you've created a successful business, it tells you what they need and what you need in order to be happy as an employee. And there's three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So one of the things that we do, and let me go back to this picture, because this is honestly the only picture that I really need in this whole slide deck. This is the most important picture. Because it's this team right here, this team defines your company and your product. So you better make damn sure that they're getting what they need. So our management style at GitHub is really to not have a management style. There is no hierarchy to our company. We took everything that is detrimental to optimizing for happiness and we threw it away. So we don't have deadlines. We don't have divisions, departments. We don't have work hours, right? All of these things are things that you don't want to do. You want to be in your natural state, working on what you want to work on, when you want to work on it, and if you can assemble a team that's really good, that's smart, that's driven, and let them go with things, then they'll do it for you, right? I could leave this company tomorrow, and GitHub would do great, because we built a team that doesn't necessarily need me, because they have the autonomy that it takes to make decisions while I'm gone. I do a lot of traveling, go to conferences, evangelize, etc. And while I do that, they're back there building kick-ass features, because they have the autonomy to do so. Yes. So this slide is us in Dublin having what we call drink ups. And a drink up is like a meetup, only instead of looking at projectors, you drink and talk to other developers. And to me, this is a more valuable way to spend your time, because this is where real ideas happen, when you're talking to other people. And the other thing that this does, a great way to grow your business, is to think about alternative advertising strategies that don't require a lot of money. So we go to various places and we buy people beer. In the grand scheme of things, this is very cheap. But what it does is establish kernels of really fanatic users, right? Really fanatic users in various geographically dispersed locations. Only 30% of the traffic to GitHub comes from the United States. And it's exactly because we build these kinds of people, only ours look more like this. Right? This is the Fork You shirt. We give this away. But we don't have to, because people actually buy this shirt. We sell this online. And here's another little tip. If you're going to give away swag, shirts and stuff, make sure they're good quality. So good that people will actually wear them, otherwise you're just wasting money. Right? If you can't sell the shirt, don't give it away. This is the GitHub mug. And this is more than just a mug. This is a metaphor. Hold on, I'll get to the metaphor. This is a metaphor for one of my favorite things, which is creating win-win solutions. So this is a mug that we printed up because we wanted to sell more merchandise. People like GitHub stuff. They identify with it, and that's great. So we can print these up, and we printed about 100 of them, and we put them on the website, and we said, hey, we have mugs for sale. And we sold out of them in 3 hours. We sold 80 mugs in 3 hours. And that's a win-win because we make profit, and you get a mug that you like. So the metaphor is this. the metaphor is do things that allow you to win and that allow someone else to win as well. It's not a zero-sum game. It doesn't have to be. Not if you optimize for happiness. And if you do this, if you optimize for happiness and you build a team that builds an amazing product and you get to do whatever the hell you want, then the VCs will come to you. But when they do, you have a choice. You have a choice, which is, am I going to optimize for money, or am I going to optimize for happiness? Thank you. And quickly, before I take a few questions, how long do I have for questions? 5 minutes. This bottom link here, I mentioned a couple of books. There's a couple more books. There's 6 books on that list, and each one of them is amazing. Question here.
Yeah, how do you offer your service if you're bootstrapping open source and it's viral? And how do you afford that? How did you guys handle it? Do you have enough money? I mean, is it just so cheap to host the code? Or?
So the question is, how do you afford bootstrapping if you don't have any money? And here's how you do it, right? So you're working full-time somewhere else, or you're doing consulting or whatever. And so you don't need money, you don't need a lot of startup capital. Like we started GitHub with $1,000 to incorporate. And that was pretty much it. We almost immediately afterwards partnered with a company called Engine Yard so that they would give us free hosting and we would put their advertising in the footer. So find creative ways to not have to pay for things.
So you guys were never scared of like, oh my God, all these open source people are using it so much and they're not doing anything. That wasn't an issue? Or?
Yeah, so the question is, weren't you afraid of the explosion of open source that's going to slam your servers and it's going to cost a ton of money? Here's another thing. Don't ever give anything away for free. And what I mean by that, and the reason that people are really down on the freemium model right now, is that you have to quantify what free means. And so I will say GitHub is free for open source, but what I'm really saying is open source is a huge way that we advertise. So it's not free, because you all that have open source on GitHub are advertising for me. It's a win-win situation. You get free hosting and collaboration tools, and I get free advertising from you, right? Win-win. Right here.
How did you get your first users, and how did that perpetuate into more users?
How did we get our first users? We got them by going to meetups. So we went to the Ruby meetups, and we said, hey, look at this cool thing that we have, because we've been talking about Git and whatnot. And we said, hey, this is a tool to make it a little bit easier. And so there was the MERB project, which if you're familiar with Ruby was alternative to Rails, and then it merged with Rails. But that was one of the first open source projects that came onto GitHub. And so just getting the people that you know involved, and especially if you're in San Francisco and you know people that have really prominent things, go talk to them and see if they will put your stuff on there or use your service or whatever that happens to be, right? And then it's just natural.
One quick question, did EngineYard give you that free hosting when you were kind of starting off, or once you had achieved a certain level of success?
The EngineYard hosting deal was very, very, very early, because we knew them. The meetups were oftentimes at the EngineYard office. So here's another thing about being in the right space in the right time. You have a choice of where you're going to be. So make sure it's going to be somewhere where lucky things can happen. And one of them was, hey, GitHub sounds really cool. Let's host it for you, because that's kind of something that EngineYard does for sites from time to time. And by just being in proximity, then it kind of happened naturally. Yes?
How did you know that your co-founders were the ones?
How did I know my co-founders were the ones? Well, it's subtle. It came from respect, mostly. Chris and PJ had a site called Air Free, or Air the Blog, which was a blog that they wrote, and they wrote about all kinds of Ruby stuff. And so I knew the code that they'd written, and I knew that they were really smart people and driven to do stuff outside of normal working hours and whatnot. And meeting them through the Ruby meetups, I got to know them socially. We would drink together, and we would say, we'd talk about stuff. And so if you have some people that you can get along with and that you can drink with, then you might be all right. But here's another tip, and luckily I haven't been bitten by this too much, but make sure you put on paper the assumptions that you have about division of labor, and especially equity splits. Like when you're bootstrapping, it's sometimes easy to not think to do those things, because hey, it's just we're buddies hacking on stuff. But when stuff starts to get real, that's where things can really fall apart. So always be thinking about that. Always be thinking about, let's take care of this. As soon as there's a glimmer of success in what you're doing, make sure you put it on paper and say, this is 50% for you, and this is 50% for me, and then you just eliminate months and months of just despair later on when things go wrong. So always be concentrating on making sure that those contracts are good. I mean, it's an unfortunate thing to have to do, but it will save your ass, I promise you. Last question, right here in the gray.
And maybe it's unfair because it's a kind of a follow-up, but I actually think that that's super relevant and broader to today's discussion. Ironically, I felt like the protagonist in your talk was investors, but I'd be willing to bet that the number of times co-founders have disagreed in terms of optimizing for happiness equals the number of times that investors do. So I think how you structure it and making sure that there's alignment is probably more important to kind of challenge your assumption than necessarily whether it's an investor or a co-founder.
Right, it's tricky, right? Sometimes founders fight, sometimes founders fight with VCs, right? I don't know what it's going to be for you. There's always going to be conflict. It's just about trying to mitigate that conflict in whatever ways you can, and then just doing whatever, do what is going to make you happy, right? If taking VC is going to make you happy, then go do that, because you'll probably get along really well with the VCs if that's your mindset. But you don't have to, right? It's all about choice. So if there's anything that you're going to take away from today, it's that you always want to have choice, and you want to be happy about having that choice. So just optimize for those things, and you'll be just fine. Thank you.